Hello, everyone, and welcome to another AIA Virtual Connect. I'm Sarah Broughton, and I'm a member of the AIA Colorado Board and the Colorado West Director. And it is with great pleasure that I have to introduce Evelyn Lee today. Evelyn, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Evelyn is going to introduce herself and let you know a lot of her background, but a few things that I want to highlight right now. If people have not had the chance to check out Evelyn's podcast, please do. It's Practice Disrupted. It's something that I personally find very informative for me in running my firm and also being a practitioner, as well as Evelyn is running for National AIA President, and she personally has my endorsement and would be an amazing ambassador for us all. So Evelyn, thank you for your time and your volunteerism in helping really shape the future of our profession. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to ask, since this is webinar format, and you're seeing literally a talking head on a screen, feel free to engage in chat as much as possible. And I'll actually have some questions throughout the presentation, so hopefully that'll even encourage more engagement. I'm used to actually having cameras on and understanding what resonates and what doesn't resonate with people, when I need to slow down and when I need to speed up. So I will be personally keeping an eye on chat, and then I'm also, sorry, I'm pulling up a very wide screen and I'm pulling up everything. And I'm going to also try to keep an eye on the question and answer. So if you happen to mistype and it come in the Q&A box, I will do that too. So, okay, I think my first slide is up. I think we're ready to go. So first of all, thank you for being here. Zoom fatigue, we know, is real. So thank you for joining us for this hour. Just as I'm giving introductions, if you could tell me a little bit about your firm, the size, your role in the firm, anything, so I can understand my audience and begin to cater this presentation a little bit more, that would be great. Feel free to drop it in the chat. I will keep running while those things are coming in. So yeah, my name is Evelyn Lee. I'm founder of the Practice of Architecture, and I'm actually a full-time employee right now at, I'm straddling two organizations, so both Slack, and we were recently acquired by Salesforce. But in my role, both at Slack and Salesforce, I'm working cross-functionally with every single role or entity or team that supports our employees. So HR, employee success or learning development, our operations team, our biz tech team, to help them, and then of course our real estate and build team to help them understand what how to build a better employee experience. Now, both of these companies pre-pandemic, including Slack, was at one-to-one desking. So we only had a 5% remote workforce. Over the course of the pandemic, we've all said, let's go to, we didn't say entirely remote, we said, let's be digital first. Salesforce has started using the marketing campaign, how do we build success from anywhere? And I'm kind of coordinating cross-functionally with what does that mean for our employees and how do we practice what we preach internally. Prior to joining Slack and Salesforce, I was a workplace consultant doing this for a lot of organizations that were trying to figure out new ways of working and answering, especially with growing real estate costs, how do we grow our company without growing our real estate footprint? Or how do we be more innovative? How are we more collaborative? So that's kind of my background and what I'm bringing to the table. So no one is talking to me in chat from what I can see. I'd love to understand where you guys are or how you feel about greater flexibility post-COVID, where you are in your thought process in your firm, how many days a week are you coming in, etc. Feel free to type that in the chat if you want. If not, I'm going to keep going. So this presentation is really about the hybrid practice, and just to set the definition, hybrid is obviously a blend of two different ways of working, either entirely remote or all the time in the office. Awesome, I'm getting some responses in chat. Thanks all. Hybrid 2 days a week in studio, employees average 2 days a week, full time in the office. Thanks everyone. the interesting thing about hybrid, which is where most not only firms in architecture are going, but where most companies are going, is that it's actually the hardest way to do things, the hardest way to structure things. Because if your entire company is entirely remote, there's a certain way you manage communications. If they're all in the office, there's a certain way you can manage communications. If they're going between the two, you kind of have to manage for all instances of having an entirely remote population and everyone in the office to manage hybrid. The good thing about a hybrid practice, though, and I think everything that we are talking about, even if you're like Robert in the office full time, is all of these really create the foundation for building a more resilient practice. So, right, hybrid means agile. So all of these tools, all of these techniques that we're going to be talking about is helping you build a more agile and adaptable and ultimately resilient and sustainable, not as sustainable as in green, but sustainable as in longevity and business continuity relative to your practice. And what I want to challenge architects to do is to really take this time coming out of, or having moved from a pandemic to probably, you know, what I would consider an endemic now, because we're living in this state, to really reflect and think about what we've learned and how do we move our practices forward with this new mindset when we talk about the future of practice and a successful hybrid practice. So I'm going to structure this presentation around these 6 topics specifically, and I'll go a little bit deeper into why I'm going to do that. And I'm also, by the way, there's a lot of text on some of these slides. I will make that available to AIA Colorado, and they can circulate to all the registrants. So don't feel like, feel free to screenshot, but also you will get these PDFs in the future. But we're going to cover this. The other thing is, I know that a lot of you are like stressed for hiring people, like you have the pipeline, you're turning away work. We're also in the middle of you know, the great resignation. And I acknowledge that everything I'm telling you today is things that need to be coordinated, planned, prepared in what is usually considered overhead hours. And I'm going to be throwing a lot of things at you today. So I literally have done so much research. I could talk easily, like I have a 2-hour, it used to be 1 hour, so now like 2 hours of content for every single one of these verticals. We're going to go very fast, say high level, but should you have any questions or want to follow up with me later, I am an open book to help support any firm through this move. So let's start with culture. So just high level question, when was the last time your firm revisited its values, and has it revisited its values? Just because a lot has changed, right? A lot of firms have come out and made equity, diversity, and inclusion statements. There's just been a lot of there's been a greater demand for flexibility and the creativity around flexibility and the ability to do work whenever you wanted. So, you know, has anyone revisited their values in their firms recently? And I have a few of these quotes running throughout, but 70% of professionals in the US would not work for a company with an intolerable workplace culture. The reason why I lead with culture is because culture is what attracts, all of this is about attracting and retaining the right individuals, but you have to have a flexible and adaptable culture in order to be able to do that. And you'll see a pattern kind of forming in terms of the slides as I move through them. But essentially what I feel like we tend to do as architects as culture is that it's done very organically, right? That the values of a company, whenever I worked at an architecture firm, and I worked at a handful before going into strategy, was, you know, in our employee handbook, but it wasn't lived into it. So I know like Slack's culture is empathy, courtesy, thriving, craftsmanship, or our values, sorry, playfulness and solidarity. And those 6 key points come up in our annual review. It comes up in every all hands. We are kind of constantly reminded of our values so that we live into it. And playfulness, I would say, even and it shows with our client engagements. So Slack is a software company, and you know, software companies release notes saying like security patch 5.4 was updated. Our playfulness shows down at that level where we say, hey, we noticed you were having problem XYZ. So we went in and then we found that security patch 5.4 was doing this, and we've gone ahead and fixed that for you. So there's a level of playfulness that comes down to the communication that we send out to our employees, and we're really living into those values. I don't feel architecture firms do that as much. And then we make culture all about events. So when people talk about losing culture during the pandemic, it's been like the lack of the ability to get together, but culture is really in everything you do and how you interact with one another and how you work together, as well as how you interact and work with clients. So here's what I think that we should do. Ultimately, I think we should be cultivating a values-based culture that needs to evolve over time. We'll talk a little bit about that going forward, so and make necessary adjustments. And again, why is culture so important? It's because it is the sole differentiator for your firm. So technically, anyone, I'm not saying it will happen, but anyone in your firm can leave the firm and replicate the processes that your firm have in place today, unless you have a proprietary software. But one thing that no one can replicate is the culture of all of those people coming together and the interactions that they have with one another. And you're like, geez, Evelyn, do we really have to revisit our values? Well, Disney just did, as an example. So for 50 years, they only had 4 keys for their customer service. And actually, they just added the key of inclusion. It started to get rolled out pre-pandemic. The news really got highlighted during the pandemic, but this was work that they started with all their employees back in 2019. So even the bigger companies are really looking at what are our values, how has they evolved over time. And one of the reasons why they do that is because the language in the HR world has really switched to, when you're hiring a new person, people used to say, we want to hire for culture fit. With everything that's happened around EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion, the language has switched to, we want to hire for culture add. So what is this person adding to our culture? Which means culture is going to change over the time. So here are high-level tactics in terms of how you can begin to address culture. So have leadership revisit the why. Use your entire employee workforce to align around 5 to 7 values, 5 to 7 words that talks about how you approach everything you do. Engage in an annual employee survey. How many of you have firms that have an annual employee survey? And one question that you need to have on that employee survey is what we call the employee net promoter score. And that question is, how many, would you recommend working at this firm to a friend? And the idea is that usually we find in every organization that I've done an employee survey with, there's a gap between where leadership is, as opposed to where, the everyday employee thinks things are. And your culture committee should ultimately be used to close the gap. And the other thing is, if every year you're asking how many of your employees would recommend working at your firm to a friend, you want all of your employees to be saying, yes, I'd absolutely recommend that we work. I would recommend that. The next thing that we're going to talk about is people and policies. So developing a shared definition of trust to make sure employees feel empowered and are productive. So obviously in this move to the to remote, right? We've gone from this butts and seats notion to how do I keep track of my employees? How do I know what I'm doing? This is really about what I call an overall people framework, to build the right framework, to create a framework in place from hiring to retaining employees over the long run, and re-looking at that entire process within the firm. So what do architects firms tend to do? We inherit our people processes. I've been incredibly guilty of this too. If I was hiring for a job captain at one firm and I moved to another firm and I needed to hire a job captain, I would literally take that old write-up, swap out firm information, firm title, and say yeah, the roles and responsibilities are roughly the same. But, really, how should we be crafting everything, including the hiring practice, to be specific for the firm, including even creating a careers landing page? We all have an about page that talks about, well, about pages vary greatly, but very few firms actually have a career page, and they're trying to recruit people, but there's nowhere people can go and say, what is it like to work at this firm? And candidates actually want to understand that. And then our lack of faith in people tend to come from a broken system. So I was in a social media group And they said, this one firm leader, they said, well, I hired this individual and we needed them to do Revit, and they said that they can do Revit, but when I hired them, they weren't at the level that I needed them to be at. So if you need a new hire to be at a certain level of Revit and to be able to hit the ground running day one, then build in a skills test into your hiring process. But it's essentially like, what things can you build into your people processes that make sure that you can trust that, and that you know what they need to do on a daily basis, given their roles and responsibilities, to move forward. So here's some numbers as to why we need to look at improving our people frameworks. So this is a survey taken pre-pandemic in January of 2020. Now you all know we are in the middle of the Great Resignation, so whopping 95%. And there was an article literally that came out in the Atlantic now 2 weeks ago that says that the numbers around the Great Resignation are actually accelerating. So in August, because the data is trailing a little bit, there was an additional number of people, a record number of people quitting during the Great Resignation. And it's really a call for employers to listen to their employees and understand employees' needs and see where they can meet them. So what should we be doing? So we should be building out a comprehensive people framework that really looks at redesigning, hiring, onboarding, people development, and this will go on to the next slide, and then trusting the people framework. So here are some, again, high-level tactics. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you. I'm happy during the Q&A to go a little bit deeper. And feel free to populate. It doesn't look like there's any questions or any other comments coming up, but feel free to populate. And also let me know if this content is resonating or not, just because I can't see anyone and I'm speaking into the ether. So when I'm talking about building a people framework, redesigning hiring. So for instance, even on the application, I'm seeing a lot more organizations put up, what are the expectations of that role at 30, 60, and 90-day increments? And some organizations have started putting up who are the team members that individual is going to be working with. So that means the candidate can Google the team members and get a better understanding of the people that work at your firm. But are there things that you can do to redesign your hiring processes? Make onboarding a one-year journey. There's a statistic I do have in here, but I worked at a lot of architecture firms, and literally my onboarding was 1 day, maybe 2 to 3 days, but it was paperwork. Here are our libraries, here are our templates, and architects are kind of known for throwing people into the deep end and seeing how well they swim. But one thing that technology firms do incredibly well is they really create what I would say is it's not dissimilar from creating a syllabus for a class. What are the expectations of a new hire, no matter what their position, but especially those coming directly out of school, are able to do at 30, 60, 90, 6 months, 9 months, and 12-month intervals? When are the check-ins? And by the way, it is never too early to start talking about career expectations at a firm to a new employee. So one of the statistics that I don't have in here, that's in another presentation, is over 75% of people decide within the first 3 to 6 months on the job, is this a place that they are going to stay, or is this firm just a stepping stone for them? So if they don't feel like they are a part of the firm culture within the 3 to 6 months, they might designate your firm as a stepping stone, and it literally implants in their head in the first 3 to 6 months on the job. So do what you can to support learning and lifelong development. For smaller firms, that might be train the trainer. So experts in your firms training one another, doing lunch and learns. For larger firms, or it might be providing, some money to be a part of organizations like the AIA, or to have a subscription to things like LinkedIn Learning or other things where you can learn deeper Revit skills. Set up a formal method to track performance management. A lot of firms have this. We actually, or I recommend a 360-degree review process. That means that everyone is going to be reviewed not only by the peers, but the people they manage. It usually helps also remove bias because you're getting inputs from multiple different areas. And it begins to open up broader conversations about how everyone can help everyone move together in their career, and then establish career paths. And if you are a small firm, a career path could be as simple as, you know, if a new hire wants to be able to run a project entirely on their own, like what is the path for them to get there? So I know we're in a state now where there's a lot of people looking for firms. There's a lot of people that have quit. But just remember, we're small. The architectural world is small. So 70% of candidates get turned off by someone else's bad experience. So whatever your firm can do to respond to every single candidate that sends something to your firm, know that that candidate is more likely to come back to your firm when there's another opportunity, and you know, maybe things align then. And also, this is also a statistic. So new employees that actually went through a structured onboarding program are also 58% more likely to be at an organization after 3 years. They're also more productive by the end of the onboarding program because it was a structured program that they were able to take people through. So team management, sorry, I just literally saw the chat. Thank you, Craig, for this content is definitely resonating and relevant. And thank you, Sarah. Okay, warmed my heart in the middle of my presentation. So awesome, thank you guys. Team management and productivity. So where is your firm struggling most with management and productivity? Especially as we move from this, like what was all office to remote to now where we were going to be hybrid. So if any of you are having specific things that you want me to cover, drop it into the chat. So team management productivity and what we tend to do as architecture firms. So I think we want to get back to business as usual, not in a bad way, but we just want to get back to business as usual as quickly as possible. But that means that we really don't take the time to evaluate and learn from things necessarily, or see where we can find improvement in our processes. And that's what I would hopefully encourage everyone to do. So what we should be doing relative to the hybrid practice is we ultimately need to create a digital HQ, and we need to act as if we're all remote. And one of the reasons why we need to do this, because when people are talking about flexibility, there's actually 2 dimensions to flexibility. You know, a lot of firms are asking the question, how many days do you need people to show up in the office? Being agile and being flexible, the dimension that we're actually missing is not only where people want to work, but it's when people want to work. If you are truly being flexible, you're allowing people to work when it is most convenient to them, as long as they are getting their work done. So building a digital headquarters becomes really, really important, because that means that anyone at any time during the day when they're ready to do work and sit down in front of their computer, they can catch up on everything that they need to catch up on with the digital headquarters. So that means all the communications and all the files are in a collected place, and there's operations and processes and policies around that. So when you're thinking about creating a digital headquarters, this very high level, this is what it's meant to do. So get aligned in broad company-wide forums, create team spaces. This is not only where you might create vertical space, like project spaces, but spaces for every vertical, but also make sure you're building a social space in your digital community too. And then make sure every decision that is made in the real world outside comes back into the digital channels. This is also a good way to log kind of everything that's happened in a project over time. So if, for instance, for any reason, a new project manager has to step into a project, they can see the entire string of communications and why every single decision was made. If you think about like the lack of ability to do that, if like so many things are hidden in email or text messages, that becomes a lot harder. So how do you bring all of those communications in one place so anyone can step in at any given time and say, okay, understand why we went this way? How are our architecture firms filling the gaps with employees leaving? That is an interesting, I don't know if I'm going to answer that, unfortunately, John Paul, with this specific, but I will say that there are a lot of, I would say, I know there are a lot of mothers or people that are out there like looking for part-time work. And there are, there's an episode on the podcast looking at like how to bring on 1099 employees to backfill some of that. To fill those gaps, though, you need to have really great onboarding information in place. So like, right, you need think of how much easier it would be to invite a temporary employee into digital headquarters where they know where the branding is, where they know where your library is, and it's all in one place, and they can get updated on the project all at once. Sorry, so I'm trying to loop this back to what I'm talking about. But all of these processes, having all these processes in place also makes it easier to onboard new individuals, I guess is ultimately what I'm trying to say. So team productivity and management tactics. So one of the things is always default to async, like always ask what can be done asynchronously and when do we need to actually come together and work together in person. Constantly do meeting audits. So only hold meetings that matter. We've gone so far as, one of our managers have gone so far as like at the end of every meeting, especially if it's a repeating meeting, asking like, is this a meeting that we can take to our digital headquarters on a regular basis? Or is this a meeting that we have, that everyone's getting enough out of it that we should maintain? And she literally asks that at the end of every one of her meetings. Create team bursty time. So for more remote teams or more flexible teams, and a few even of our engineers teams, we say, Monday through Thursday between 2 and 3, or between 1 and 12 and 3, we expect everyone to be really responsive to any questions that are being put out into the digital headquarters. Any communications that comes to the digital headquarters, expect to respond to your team at that time. So sometimes I hold all of my questions and then I kind of release them at that moment, knowing that I'll get an immediate response. Otherwise, like our general communication standard is everyone else, you have like 24 hours to get back to everyone. Also make time for deep work. Now this is true of like I'm in back-to-back Zooms all the time, so I actually don't get work done until after hours. I feel like at some level, all of us can relate. So make sure you're scheduling deep work in your calendar. This becomes extra tricky if you're dealing with clients and you're managing a lot of consultants. So for teams like that, I've encouraged that, allow your team members permission to block off X number hours of focus time on their calendar, like if you have a shared calendar. So that it's just calendar, like time that they can actually focus on the work and get it done. There is a lot of research done if you're interested in innovative and shredding and moving that online of brain writing versus brainstorming. So I would just recommend to Google, how do you brain write? There is a lot of it actually it enhances collaboration and brings in a lot of people, myself included, who like, whether it's groupthink or any other number, like I get really, I'm just like not as quick with Post-it notes as other people, and I'm an introvert by nature. So there's actually a lot of studies about how brain writing engages more of the teams over brainstorming, and you can actually do a lot more innovation in an asynchronous way and then come together when you ultimately need to come together. And then track accountability through metrics. So set up a KPI system to track ability. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that, so we are not bursty 100%, like by nature, we are not, we do not collaborate well 100% all of the time. So there was this, in addition to this quote, there was a study that was put out by McKinsey, and they broke groups up into 3 different groups. So the first group, and the three groups all were asked to solve the same problem set. The first group, they said, go off and work primarily independently, and you know, if you need to come together, come together. The second group, they stuck in the same room and said, like, let's all work through this together over the course of this limited period of time. And the third group, they said, you know, work independently, but make sure you're intentional about coming together in regular increments. So the first group, they had really innovative ideas, but because they didn't come together enough, they weren't able to productively move any single one of those ideas forward. The second group that was collaborating together 100% of the time, all of the time, suffered from a lot of groupthink. So they were able to get a long way down with like a less innovative idea. They lost the innovation because they were trying to muddle through it together rather than the independent creativity being able to bubble up to the top. And the third group was the best of both worlds, right? They were innovative, but they were also able to move things forward. So when you're thinking about how often people come together with intention, think about how we are naturally bursty, and all of those questions or all of those nuances that say, you know, like, oh, we're missing that innovation that happens when we naturally bump into each other in the halls. There is an article out there by Harvard that says, like, there's actually no metrics saying like those in the hall passing moments create better or a more innovative experience. So anyway, something to think about when you are thinking about how often people come into the office and the intentionality with bringing people together. High-level security and support. This is what we tend to do. This is really more about the physical network and moving to cloud. So, you know, how many of you actually have physical networks, and how many of you are on the cloud right now? And making sure that we are placing enough investment into IT as a cost of doing business. And then what we should do is we should look at considering moving everything to the cloud. There's a lot of medium-sized firms that suffered when they went entirely remote, you know, because the server was overloaded. They're not used to having that many people VPN in. You know, and there's a lot of different reasons why principals don't want to move things to the cloud. My general response to that from a security standpoint is anytime that you'll log into a financial institution or anytime that you go to a doctor's appointment and they're sitting there typing your medical information into the computer, your health data and your personal health data and your personal finance data are already on the cloud. So if your architecture firm data is more important than that, by all means present that argument, but more information than you would probably like are probably already on the cloud. So how do you create a proper IT operational budget to make sure that it scales? So here are some things that are moving to the cloud can do. So cost savings. So actually, I know a lot more software companies are delivering as software as a service, and there's a lot of firms that are necessarily struggling with that, but this move to a monthly subscription, with the move to cloud computing, it actually means that you can spend less on hardware because so much of that computing power is now in the cloud. So there is an ability to get greater cost savings with over time with the move to the cloud. The other thing is it's very easy to scale to increase and decrease your cloud capacity than it is to increase and decrease your physical network capacity. So as your firm grows or you know, during a recession shrinks and moves back and forth, that adjustment, those type of payments are easier to make. And then increase security. I'm happy to talk through any one of these things. But in terms of additional security and support tactics, here are like some baseline things firms can look into. So redevelop policies and procedures. there's a lot of new phishing schemes out there. So just make sure that your employees are aware. I'm a fellow board member of mine on the AIA national board. One of their employees fell prey. I don't know a better word other than fell prey right now. It's Wednesday, and I can't think of a better word, to the gift card scam, right? So they ended up purchasing a gift card for what wasn't the partner. So just make sure like that employees are generally aware. Like if you're like literally tell them, I will never send you an email from the middle of a meeting demanding money, like demanding you go run out and do something for me. Like just reassure them of that. Implement single sign-on software. Okta is a version of single sign-on software. It actually makes it much easier to deploy. And then if a computer gets lost, for instance, deny access to various different software entities. Also look at enterprise password management. So passwords are like a very easy thing to break. Password management, just make sure that you have better security over any software program that your employees are accessing via their computer. You can do it at an enterprise level, so 1Password or LastPass, and then roll out two-factor authentication whenever you can. So I know, and I even get annoyed when I have to make sure my phone is nearby for me to log on to my email account. But that is like having that two-factor authentication where you get like a text message for any login that you have is really just like a baseline level way to increase security and stop security hackers. The other thing I want to touch on very high level is tools. And any new tools that you may have adopted. So a lot of people, for instance, adopted Teams because it was part of their Microsoft suite. Some firms adopted Slack. But what tools have you adopted in the move to the pandemic? And feel free to put them in chat if you would like. But here's what we tend to do with tools. I like to say that Teams, thanks, Craig. I like to say that architecture firms tend to MacGyver tools. One, we don't like spending a lot on our software, right? Which is reasonable, but that means that we tend to extend our tools or see can our tools do more than they're actually meant to do. There's this one firm that worked with us at Slack, and they had these gorgeous renderings. The renderings had this very, I don't know if it was like a certain filter that was applied, but I always knew when I received a rendering from that firm just because it was like the look and feel. And I asked them how they did that, and they walked me through the process, and they took their renderings through, I don't know, it started in 3D Studio Max, and then you had to do some type of trace on Illustrator, and then they moved it into Photoshop. And I was like, wow, that means any new person you bring onto your firm to output that type of rendering, you need to make sure that they learn all of those steps to get from X to Z to make it look like that special. So, are there any processes built in that you can, or new tools or tool sets that you can begin to eliminate all of those steps that we're creating? A lot of companies, a lot of architecture firms, actually there's a terminology for it, is that we by developing these new ways of doing things and not looking at what is the quickest way to get to X to Z, because often there are shortcuts and tools if we know how to use them properly, we develop technical debt. So it's mostly added time doing things that could be done in shorter time distances. So really just make sure when you're going forward, define what you need your tools to actually do and make sure they were actually built to do that. And then understand the strengths and weaknesses of all of your tools. The other thing I want to do is as we move into the hybrid space, as we move into engaging more clients in these tools, make sure you are testing the client side engagement of it. So for instance, on my Slack computer, because Teams is our largest competitor, I'm not allowed to download Teams onto my computer, I was receiving from an outside vendor, I was receiving some Teams invites. And because I didn't have the application downloaded on my computer, my experience of what they were showing me was very different than their experience because they had the application downloaded at the computer and I was viewing it through a computer browser. So I would be like, oh, can you, zoom on, like, what is happening in this one area over here? And they would tell me like, oh, just grab this tool and highlight it. And I was like, well, the browser version didn't have the tool for me to go and highlight it. So just understand when you're working with clients that what is their experience of the tool that they're seeing as well. So create an evaluation strategy and constantly keep a lookout for updates to the tool and where you can improve processes and efficiencies. So the one great thing about SaaS is that updates are happening all the time, right? You don't have to wait to the annual DVD, CD to come out for new tools to come out. So designate one person as an individual that kind of keeps an eye on all those updates and quickly is able to kind of make a decision like, oh, this could speed things up for us, like thanks to this update, because tools are constantly being updated all the time. Define which tools everyone has to be on. So one of the things that middle managers have struggled with the most throughout this, as firms adopt Teams or other things, is like, oh, well, this principal, they only respond to me via email. This principal, they like text, right? If you need a quick response, the best way to get them is text them. This principal, like if you want a quick call or if you want a quick response for them, the best, like they insist on me picking up the phone and calling them. This principal is like he or she are, they're really interested in trying out new technology. So they're pretty active in Teams. Like make sure everyone knows which communication tool to go to kind of remove the friction of understanding what do I need to be on to communicate with which person, right? Again, back to the digital headquarters, make sure you're all using the same tools to communicate to each other and generally have that hierarchy. The last one is really about kind of the hybrid employee. One of the things that hybrid really opens up is the ability for remote participation. And Slack has a research group called the Future Forum. And every quarter, the Future Forum sends a survey to over 10,000 knowledge workers. And one of the interesting findings that they really found was that, specifically Black office workers and diverse office workers were more likely to say that they preferred remote work because now they don't have to do as much code switching. So understand the opportunities also that comes with hybrid work and the potential to allow people to kind of show up as their best self when they need to show up. The other thing with the hybrid, and then this is not necessarily anything new here, don't do work from your bed. But one thing that I want to emphasize to firm principals is that you need to live and breathe any new policies that you're setting into place, and you need to be aware of what the example that you're setting. So if you're telling your firm that they have the ability to be flexible and develop their own schedules and come into the office whenever they want, but you as a principal are showing up from 8 to 5 every single day, you're sending the signal to be a leader at this firm, you need to show up 8 to 5 every single day. That's the example that you're setting, independent of how flexible your policy is. So just remember that. And remember that like all of this is really about attracting and retaining the best individuals. If we could take one lesson away from the Great Resignation, it's listen to their employees and figure out how to deliver on the requests that they're asking. This is really an employee market right now. And then this is 2 slides that I added kind of at the end. So we are licensed to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. I was speaking at an NCARB event, so that includes the individuals in the profession. And then just in closing, the hybrid practice is a resilient practice, and kind of also thank you for joining. So hopefully that was helpful. And now I'm open to any Q&A that we may have. Our owners and principals are full-time in the office to assist those employees that are hybrid. John Paul, does that mean that I guess my thing would be, like, how well do they understand the hybrid experience if they are full-time in the office? Wait, so I'm a little bit confused, John Paul. And I don't know, is there the ability for anyone to turn off on their mics? When in the office, they get better guidance. I don't, you know, the interesting thing with the especially newer and younger employees is that they're digital natives. So they can absolutely, there's a way to give people good guidance even not being in the office. So I guess I would ask you to seek other ways, or to ask them, like, how do they best learn and how do they best receive information. Sarah, can I give you more examples of a digital HQ? I think digital HQ really is just like making sure you get, Sarah, that your team develops. So it's usually never just one tool. Slack is a digital HQ, but behind Slack, you know, we use Google Drive to store all of our files. And we use Asana for project management. So a digital HQ is going to be like a stack. Like, what are the 4 to 5 tools that you guys are probably always interacting in, and how are you collectively using them? Like, making sure that the policies and processes, similar to how, like, it's like the next level beyond your folder structure, right? It's taking that to the next level. How do we use, if we're in teams, how do we set up projects and teams? What's the template to how we set up and projects and teams and how we communicate there? So how do we kind of templatize everything and move it into digital HQ? Hopefully that's helpful. You're nodding your head. Does working hybrid mean we need to provide laptops for everyone? Yeah, Darcy, I mean, unfortunately, yes. I mean, ultimately, or the alternative there is potentially providing desktops for both office and remote. Hybrid, I mean, really, we're talking about hybrid. The core is giving people the greatest amount of flexibility to do the work on their schedule. Not saying that they don't get the work done, but providing the greatest amount of flexibility to your workforce to get the work done when they are going to be most productive to get it done. So if that means that they have to, like, drive into the office or, like, drive to a specific location every time, rather than the ability, I'm pre-pandemic, I was flying around visiting offices all the time. So my ability to get work done is just like wherever I could find power and open up my laptop and get work done. So yes, that is kind of a pinch point for smaller and medium-sized firms that really need to do the technology switch over to laptops.
I'm turning on my microphone right now.
Yeah.
Evelyn, this is amazing. Thank you. I've been taking screenshots and sending it to various members of our team as you've been talking. But one thing in listening to your podcast this last Sunday, when you were interviewing several firm owners that are all virtual about hybrid practices, one thing that really resonated with me that maybe you can expand on, and it's a lot of what you've been talking about today, is purposeful and organization is key to flexible virtual working, and being transparent about the tools really allows for that flexibility. Do you want to expand any more on those concepts?
Yeah, I was actually looking for the episode so I could post it to channel. I'll keep
Well, I
kind
can
of
do
looking
it.
and tell you. Okay, so it was, yeah, I mean, and again, I realize that a lot of what I'm talking to is about setting up these operations and processes that take overhead time, but like by having those processes in place, by everyone knowing where they need to go to get what, that by essentially being more like being virtual and hybrid means that organizations have to be more organized when it comes to like basic operations processes and policies, and take the time to do that, and also take the time to look at how do we constantly improve that. So because being virtual and being agile allows, like I said, anyone at any point to drop into any communication channel, whether it be Teams or Slack or Google or whatever you're using. I know there's multiple options out there, and understand the entire breadth of the project at any given time. So that also means that there's a certain level of transparency that happens because, because not, because everyone on the team is going to be seeing everything about the project all in one place. And also, if I mean, we on the podcast, Janine and I have always stressed greater transparency. I don't know, as a young architect, I never really understood like the value of the details that I was doing and how that translated. And I was also never told like, we've allocated 40 hours to you to get X, Y, and Z done. And if you go over those 40 hours, that means that our profit margin on the project is really going to struggle. It's amazing by giving your team members kind of that level of transparency around even like how many hours you've allocated to them. It helps them take greater ownership of the work and say like, I'm responsibility to I'm responsible for the profitability of this project, even if I'm working on these details. So in terms of like creating the communication and transparency and showing, Monograph does this. I know one of the firm owners on that podcast uses Monday, but she's very transparent about all of her financials. Leah Lissaber of Fora Architects. So everyone knows if they're tracking right, and like when they're going to really start impeding profitability on a project.
Yeah, well, our firm, we use Deltek, Jira software, and are very transparent about the hours and the time going in. I think another really fascinating point that you talked about was the whole idea about flexibility and almost defining, and that's something we're doing within our firm, is really defining what flexibility means for our culture and within Roland Broughton. And this whole idea about asynchronous working, that really resonated with me. Anything more on that subject, and what you're seeing from your research, and maybe?
Yeah, well, I mean, a great example of this, I was talking to one firm partner and he hired this person. So he works in a small community, and he was like out to coffee with another firm partner. The community is small enough where their employees kind of bounce between firms, and they're like, oh, you hired that guy, like we had to let him go because he wasn't like performing. Like, how's he doing over at your firm? And this firm principal was like, oh, he's doing great. And like what? Why is he doing so great? The firm and it's the firm who he moved to allowed him to start work at like the previous complaint was this guy would always come in late and be really lethargic and really just not get into things for a while. The firm he moved to let him start work when he needed to. It was usually closer to 10 a.m. or noon, but that individual would then be super productive until 8 p.m. If he needed to be, right, 8 p.m., 9 p.m., because he was working at on the schedule that was most productive, not only from a picking up kids standpoint, but I am most productive, if you're a morning person or an evening person, I am most productive in these hours. So just by allowing that agility and flexibility, he he found a productivity in an employee that another firm like thought was a total dud because they like couldn't get them to show up at 8 a.m., for the life of them. So really like allowing for that to happen. So when we're looking at asynchronous work, it's a lot of like, so we do asynchronous stand-ups. So I think a lot of firms are doing like every morning, let's have on a Zoom call and tell everyone what's going on. But we do asynchronous stand-up. So instead of doing that, we go into our Slack, our project Slack channel or our team Slack channel, and every morning my team leader posts like, give us the update for the day, and then we follow. Like, here's what I accomplished yesterday. Here's where I'm working on today. Here's where I'm having potential roadblocks. And then if there's people that can help me with that roadblock, I'll like flag them or I'll mention them. And then they'll come in and they'll help me throughout the day. So kind of to what extent can you even take all of those meetings that were really ultimately reporting meetings? Like, if you think about it, you're not building culture in those meetings, right? You're not like sharing necessarily personal information, maybe at the front end or the back end of the information, but the core of those meetings is just reporting out to one another. How can you do that in an asynchronous manner? The other thing that we've done, even in our AIA committee meetings, is like, any training that you do, like they used to be lunch and learns. Sometimes I can't make a lunch and learn and I really want to learn from that. So just record them and make sure you share them back in channel. And then all of a sudden you have a library of every single lunch and learn. And then the other thing to think about hybrid work too is, I guess you were asking specifically about asynchronous work. But it's just really making sure everything goes back in channel and you're allowing people to work at a time that's best for them. My schedule is really wonky because I do have young kids. So I'm like give me the 8 to 3, I'll take a break, cook dinner, put the kids to sleep, and then I'm back on at 9. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I know it's also helpful. We are up at our hour. Evelyn, we could talk for days. Thank you so much. I think we've hit everything on the chat that's coming in, and thank you for sending this presentation. And we will make sure to everyone who is tuned in today, we'll make sure that everyone has access to this presentation. I also put on Evelyn's podcast has been put in the chat, and then I specifically noted the one about managing a virtual practice. I highly recommend listening to it.
And there's actually, if you're interested, we have a very forward-thinking community. I'm just going to pitch this, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Called The Lab. Oh wait, you can't see it if you go there. Sorry. It's a community. Sorry, that was the wrong link. Don't click. You're going to get this login page that you're not going to be able to access. But the lab is a community of forward-thinking architects that are talking through all these things. People who are like actively like, we want to do things differently. We don't want to go back to the way things are. It's small, but I feel like there's a small but mighty community forming there and sharing ideas and even talking about how we share employee resources to manage through things like that. So yeah, check that out too.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure having you here today. Thank you for your insights and your strategy. And we look forward to continuing our conversation.
Okay, thanks all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me. Okay,
thank
bye.
you. Bye.